Okay, thanks everyone. Good morning or afternoon, depending on what time zone you happen to be in. Um, I'm Eli Dart. Jason Zarowski is unable to make today's Cyber Infrastructure Engineering Brown Bag. Today we are happy to have Prasad Calyam, who is going to talk to us about cyber and software automation in support of the neuroscience community at the University of Missouri. So Prasad, take it away.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning for some of you. This is really a great opportunity to share this kind of exciting project we started about a year ago, unofficially about a couple of years ago. And it sort of kickstarted with some funding from NSF's cyber training program. And today I'd like to kind of share my thoughts of where this project got started from, what we're up to right now. And my hope is that some of you can give me some feedback on maybe your side of the story of what we are seeing, trying to bring cyber infrastructure engineering kind of expertise and resources to help scientists who do computational neuroscience. So the format of talk that I have planned for today is I'll start off with a few slides. My colleague Satish Nair, who's a faculty in the same department, electrical engineering, computer science. So he's expected to stop by. He's coming from another meeting. If he shows up, then I'll have him, go through a few slides, and then I'll finish the talk. So that's sort of a plan for today. And in case he's not able to make it, I'll just keep, going. So this project basically, started, in our lab that I run, VIMAN lab, which is a lab where we look at cloud computing problems, from sort of a wide range of problems of how to look at resource allocation, monitoring. Perf sonar is sort of a common topic we work in terms of collecting data, looking at how we can use perf sonar to do some intelligent analysis and application adaptations. And we look at building test beds really to help people in manufacturing, healthcare, education, public safety. And this project is really trying to help with training of neuroscientists with cyber infrastructure. So kind of is part of what we do in the lab. And a little bit of cybersecurity is also an aspect we focus in our lab. So I have a beautiful set of students, as you can see from the picture, who work very hard. We all have fun in VIMAN lab. And the project started, from this idea that, this is University of Missouri. If you Google University of Missouri, this is the picture that you will see. We have a very beautiful campus, the columns, and it's a physical infrastructure. And our journey these days is really how do we build a beautiful cyber infrastructure? And what that looks like, is this project called SciNeuro, which is what I'll be talking today, which is bringing neuroscience and our cyber infrastructure at MU. And I see Tim Middlecoop is one of the attendees, and he's our Director of Research Computing. So he maintains and manages our science DMZ and other experimental as well as the campus computing resources, networking resources, storage resources. So in collaboration with our research computing engineering team here, faculty who, like me, do cyber infrastructure engineering research, along with neuroscience faculty, also including some people who do bioinformatics, who use Cyverse and other national infrastructure. So we sort of teamed up to come around this common platform called SciNeuro, where we can engage neuroscientists who have either a lot of data to bring in to analyze, or scientists who have a lot of tools to analyze this data, who essentially don't own the data, but they're interested in bringing their sort of machine learning hammers or other kinds of tools to look at data in interesting ways. So we're trying to build this platform, like I think in terms of farmers and miners of data. So you're trying to build sort of a social structure and a framework where they can bring their data, and people who have interest to analyze it can help them, and together they pursue bold innovations. So that's the idea of SciNeuro. And the problem, as we all know, especially in neuroscience, and this is true for other sciences, is that the data sets are pretty large, and the scale of computations are very large. And Neuron is sort of this very popular tool that my colleague uses. And the number of nodes and the scale of computations very quickly, outnumber the resources we have at Mizzou. So he's using a Neuroscience Gateway, which is SDC's gateway project, again funded by NSF. And he also has collaborators at Rutgers and in India and in many places, in Puerto Rico. So he has expertise that he goes back and forth with in his projects that are sort of spanning beyond the institution, and a lot of the data sets are starting to be becoming shareable at scales where you probably need to go to Amazon. And as we know, even NSF and other agencies are pushing for some of these collaborations with Amazon, so that the scale of this data and processing actually can be done realistically, right, in academia, and not just be limited by our campus or some sort of national resources. So, so all of these sort of ideas of we don't have enough instruments or expertise or computation or storage on our local campuses is driving us to go from this Excel scale computing to Excel scale. And I stole this from a Clemson University talk, which I think is very fitting, that we can't do this on our applications that we've used in the past or infrastructures that we locally own. And so there is this need to bridge to national infrastructures and maybe even public clouds to achieve the scale of computing and storage and processing of the application data, and answer very important hypotheses. So the way I look at this journey of a scientist who has this problem in their domain, and in this case neuroscientist, I guess it could be a bioscientist, it could be a geoscientist, it could be anybody with sort of this large data problem. Their journey, which I call as a big data journey, starts with them doing some experiments or finding some sort of a phenomenon that seems interesting, and they essentially want to investigate further and create some sort of a hypothesis around data, right? And the beginning of that journey is essentially what other data exists that kind of explains some phenomenon I'm seeing that's interesting. Is it something real, or is it something as an accident, right? So they're trying to get more context around that phenomenon. And obviously, expertise is another thing they look for. So they start feeling alone, right? Oh, am I the only one seeing this? Is somebody else seeing this? Or can somebody else explain what is going on? And as they start creating their experiments to test their hypothesis, they start requiring computation and storage and other resources, networking to get to some of these computation and storage at scales that is suited to their experiments. So so that's how I think we see people building sandboxes for their scientific hypothesis testing and looking at more advanced cyber infrastructures. And once there is some evidence, right, in the second step of how some hypothesis actually providing some promising results, they then start worrying about scale up, right? How do I increase the problem size? How do I increase the data size? How do I start using more or different tools to analyze the data and start building these workflows? And soon enough, they start joining communities, like I said, Professor Satish Nair joined the neuroscience community to get some resources. He's part of several other communities to help guide his research. And he's starting to work with the cyber infrastructure community also, me and Tim and others, to look at how he can analyze his data at his site, at his collaborator's site, and there are real-time needs to process this. And obviously, we're all in the business of research that is sponsored, and we're also looking at multi-institutional, multidisciplinary ways to engage, get funding, and pursue bold science. So I look at the project that I'm going to talk about today as evolution, which is true for pretty much any scientist in any domain, but we'll try to give you a flavor, and my colleague Satish Nair just stepped in. I'll try to give you a flavor of how the neuroscience problems in sort of this big data we're thinking about have started to occur in our campus, and hopefully at the end we can have a discussion if you have similar problems or different problems that we are seeing. And the project actually was motivated initially about 3 years back, or close to even 4 years back, with a CC Star grant, also an MRI grant that essentially led MU to build a sort of an interesting cyber infrastructure vision that's both operational and experimental. And so we have the ability to, have the experimental infrastructure be connected to a science DMZ so that we could actually have federated access to other external resources. We have a Genie rack, and we do have scientists who use Amazon Web Services and, like I said, Neuroscience Gateway, and remote university collaborators pretty much everywhere. And one of the interesting things University of Missouri has is, being a flagship university for the state of Missouri, it is sort of a central place to come for healthcare, for computing, and other kind of things. So we have a lot of smaller universities around Missouri, University of Missouri, who want to collaborate, use our resources. And so enabling them to do that is also part of our mission in this cyber infrastructure. And the users that we had engaging span a variety of fields in bioinformatics, geoscience, imaging, and even sort of building new user services for doing cyber infrastructure engineering for the campus. So all of this has sort of been kickstarted by the NSF grant, and Eli Dart is here. So science DMZs and the NSF CC Star program has really been a great high impact activity that has led to many great things. And I think it's also our campus example is another example where the impact of funding and priorities from sort of the community really can kickstart a lot of interesting things. So we are building very interesting test beds for a lot of communities, and we have very interesting technologies that we're always exploring because of the grant and the collaborations. And so that brings us to the story of how Dr. Satish Nair, who's actually like 3 doors down from my office, we kept talking in the corridor about, is there a way we could work together? He also came from Ohio State. I came from Ohio State. So we have some affection beginning from the beginning. And so it took us about a year to throw some ideas of how the cyber infrastructure capabilities on campus, which many people don't know. Even at the beginning, Dr. Satish Nair had no good understanding. And also from my perspective, looking at cyber infrastructure engineering, trying to understand how to engage these domain scientists to come in and take full advantage of these kind of capabilities. So this was sort of something we pitched several ideas, and finally it came to fruition as a collaboration from this NSF cyber training grant we got last fall. That's kind of when we started, but we wrote the proposal early last year with ideas of really saying it probably starts with research on training of how to get the neuroscientists to understand how their software and all the cyber infrastructure needs need to be put together and in some sense automated to start doing the big data. And we knew that it had to be something that is not only our students, so Satish and our students and my students in our labs trying to be part of this training, but really get people in biology, psychology, in medical school, and other places to also be part of our training research, I guess. So what we decided to focus is start with a course, obviously, that is not so daunting. So we have a 1 credit research course. I'll talk a little bit more about it, where we pair neuroscience and cyber infrastructure, or sort of engineering, computer science students to work on joint projects. And that's actually been very successful and interesting. So we have 2 iterations of that. We'll give you more details on that in this talk. But that was one of those things we started doing, is start small with this 1 credit course, get students involved, get their faculty involved, and get some use cases to collaborate around. And we're starting to also develop more rigorous courses, 3 credit courses and undergrad courses. And we have a research experience for undergrad in neuroscience that's funded by NSF and other activities. So we have a lot of avenues in which we could create these opportunities to do the research on the training. And another aspect is workshops. So at the end of the talk, I'll give you some information of a workshop. We would like to bring cyber infrastructure engineers and neuroscience, scientists and other allied people to come together to University of Missouri, and NSF has travel grants so that we could actually share each other's experiences, maybe try some of the training exercises we're developing in our grant. And if all of that works and we've refined it, hopefully spread this more widely at national conferences. So that's sort of our proposal to NSF that was funded, and we're on our way. And as you can see on the left side, some of the things we've been focusing, and Eli Dart appreciates this, that we start with engaging the users, having them give the requirements, and also again this the opportunity to kind of start building something they can use very quickly through some Science Gateway portals. So I'll talk more about some of the ways we're trying to build these portals on our campus and use sort of the national resources of software and cyber infrastructure. And our MU cyber infrastructure is built around templates of cyber infrastructure, so we can actually reuse, repurpose cyber infrastructure configurations across experiments or domains. So we'll talk a little bit about that also in the rest of the talk. And finally, the lab exercises that will come out of the courses and the research and training. So we'll give you a sample of those also in this talk. So I'll now hand it over to Dr. Satish Nair. He'll go through basically his vision of where he sees the challenges from neuroscience, and where he sees cyber infrastructure as probably a good solution to begin with, and how there needs to be this sort of a convergence of cyber infrastructure capabilities and neuroscience problems to do very interesting, bold new innovations. So I'll have him come and give a few points on that. So I will kind of mute myself. Yes, and I will make a switch. Please bear with me.
So while we're switching speakers, I'd just like to say, if folks have questions, please type the questions into the chat window, and we'll try to incorporate them as well, either during the flow, if that seems like the right thing to do, or we can do questions at the end as well. Thanks.
Okay. So we are back online here. Can you hear me? Everything?
Yep, you sound great.
Okay, great. Well, I think, first of all, I think Prasad said this too. We appreciate the opportunity and support from the National Science Foundation that made this possible. Probably we were going to do it anyway, but that helped. So I think Prasad has provided an overview of our collaboration. Let me motivate why neuroscience is probably a very good candidate for this particular project and how we sort of wrote it in the proposal. So you must be listening to this podcast, and let's say you're fairly engrossed in listening to it. Somebody taps you on the shoulder from the back. Your immediate reaction, actually, there are two circuits that are activated if that happens. One is a hardwired circuit that is of a fight and flight type, which you have no control over. It's subconscious. While the other circuit is more of a cortical circuit that developed in species with evolution. That kicks in about a 1/12 of a second later. So you initially begin with this reaction of slight fear, and then suddenly your cortical circuit kicks in and says, well, you are in a proper room, you're not in the forest, nobody's going to kill you, and it subdues that cortical primitive instinct. So these two circuits, although you may think from an engineering point of view, there are two circuits, we know there are those circuits, we should be able to understand them, but it has been very difficult even to understand these circuits. And pathology in the circuits leads to a spectrum of anxiety disorders, all the way up to post-traumatic stress. Anxiety is a big issue now. So just to give you, an idea, there are computational neuroscientists working very closely with neuroscientists, biologists, trying to address problems of this type, very important problems. And the National Institute of Mental Health recently started a totally brand new initiative titled Computational Psychiatry, which probably would, one of the reasons for that is we need to address these challenging problems. And these problems require scientists to work together, researchers to work together, even students to work together. And we need vehicles, we need infrastructure, we need trained workforce, we need a host of, all infrastructure type, including physical infrastructure, cyber infrastructure, workforce infrastructure. So the time is right, I think, for neuroscientists to have such structures to basically advance the state of the art. So that's the big picture. And if you look at, I think, the first slide here, it just shows all the different components that we need that go into this science activity. You have artificial intelligence modules coming up, machine learning coming up, and then at the very low levels, you have, an understanding of genes, statistics. Then you have differential equations, which model neurons and networks, the brain activity. So there is a bottom-up approach using fundamental basic physics and engineering. And then in areas that we don't understand today, we use tools such as machine learning and artificial intelligence. Now, how does a group really span the spectrum? There's a huge spectrum here, which goes all the way from, time. It spans a huge space and time scales. You go from 1 millisecond. So go to the next slide here. So actually, let me go through the slide step by step and not jump on. Probably this doesn't need much elaboration. What I wanted to point out on this slide, probably one of the things is there's a huge jump, 592% increase in PSAT major selections of neuroscience among 9th to 11th graders. And undergraduate majors in neuroscience are being started at many, many universities. There's a huge increase in the number of PhD degrees awarded and so on. And so there is obviously, there is a need from the community for better understanding of mental health in general. And there is an interest among students, which is exciting. But to make it all happen, I think you need collaborative research, and that's what I'll focus on. So we'll go to the next slide. I briefly talked about this. To begin with the collaborative research, engineers, in fact, have identified reverse engineer the brain as one of the 14 grand challenges. And so hopefully many more engineers will participate in this exciting enterprise. I'll probably let you read the rest of the slide. I've talked a little bit about it. Some of the very challenging problems that we need to address in the next century is, how does physical activity of neurons result in mental activity? How do nature and nurture shape us and make us who we are today? And then how do we protect brains from aging? So I need to, we didn't have a reference here. This comes out of our book, Molecules to Brains. We'll be happy to provide, details on these. So the big point being made is collaborations between researchers from physical sciences, life sciences, and medical sciences are needed to address this challenge. So I'm going to the next slide. So what exactly is the data problem in neuroscience? You have data in, pretty wide range of space and time scales, from a millisecond to a month, from a micron to a meter. And then you have numerous animal models, flies, worms, fish, mice, rats, rabbits, so on. Our interest, of course, is to gain an understanding from all of these and have applied to humans. So humans is one of the important endpoints, in addition to understanding all the scientific underpinnings of these circuits. So right now, these questions are mainly tackled by individual labs and by those with whom they collaborate. As data sets grow, this becomes very complex and it'll become more difficult to analyze and draw conclusions. It is very clear to scientists, both in physical sciences and biological sciences, that you do need big data to address some of the really challenging questions. And so we have a first step in doing that. How do you basically make sense of this data? Because very soon an individual lab loses track of the different data sets, the different software, the different platforms. So I think we have a very interesting interdisciplinary setting at University of Missouri. We have 50 plus neuroscience investigators and about 50 plus physical sciences investigators, as probably exist in other universities also. But this provided an ideal setting. So I'll go to the next slide. And before that, I'll probably repeat what Prasad just said a little while earlier. That it was, I think Prasad had all these tools and an understanding of cyber infrastructure, which I am an engineer, but I've worked in computational neuroscience for some time. Those terms are still difficult for even engineers to completely comprehend. So it is essential that we have this ability to talk, and that happened because we had a merger of electrical computer engineering with computer science about a year back. That sort of forced us to be in the same faculty meetings, share offices down the corridor. Anyway, I think to make a long story short, that was a pretty win-win for both of us. And we hope it will be for quite a few researchers on campus also. Because to take advantage of, for instance, the BRAIN Initiative, which has a lot of money, and then the NSF Big Data Initiative. So there are several such programs coming up, which will need very synergy between different disciplines. And I think Prasad being here, that was very helpful, at least if I consider myself as a neuroscientist from that point of view. So engineers sort of straddle that zone between, I think, cyber infrastructure, computer science, and the basic neuroscience that biologists do. So it happened to be a very nice win-win situation for both of us. So let me go to the next slide. So what we are trying to do as part of this initial project from NSF is, we are trying to make workflows and pipelines to solve problems, take standard problems which neuroscientists are tackling these days, and scale it up. Find a way to, first of all, make their present research easy to do, to make sure software is accessible easily, they're all available in one platform, and basically automate several of the standard processes that they're engaged in presently. So we have picked several exemplars, right from modeling a single neuron. We have an exemplar which very soon should have an end-to-end workflow on that. And then we are working on networks of neurons. How do you model networks of neurons? Starting with that single cell model. And then the user will have the ability to change several parameters in all these models and look at the output by just clicking. And some of these network models require, at least at the high end, some of the ones we are working on, which we will come to by about year 2 or year 3 of this project. We are about, getting done with year 1 of the project. We will use supercomputers. We will need that. And for a lab neuroscientist, they have absolutely no idea how to use supercomputers. They find that it's a huge learning curve. We'd like to minimize that and provide them with easy to use workflows. So, and then I think there are others such as, fMRI data, which the medical scientists need very good workflows. So we haven't tackled that yet. We'll come to that in year 3. In parallel with this, we also are interested in including that in education. See, we already have modules which we use in undergraduate courses. We would like to provide them with direct access, to workflows to make those models more realistic. And then we also have an outreach component. We are working with about 90 teachers from around the country. These are undergraduate neuroscience researchers, not engineering. So we'd like to provide them with the same platform, but they would like questions addressed at a much lower level so that they can use these modules probably in 2 or 3 weeks of their classes. We really would like these modules used right up to the freshman level. And we are also looking at some K through 12 initiatives. So we span a wide spectrum, right, from K through 12 to PhD level. Starting next month, there will be 24 PhD researchers on campus here. We have an NIH Brain Initiative R25 grant. So these researchers come from all universities, including Stanford, MIT, and primarily from biology and psychology. There are a few engineers also. So they will be camping here for 2 weeks to look at computational neuroscience, how that will enable and actually advance their own research. So we'd like to use some of our workflows. Actually, we will be testing some of them with them. We'd like to continue to develop and get input also from them as to what workflows are meaningful there for them and so on. So that's something that's going on in parallel. Now, if you go to the next slide, I think this is our big vision. And I think Prasad will talk about it a little bit also. So I talked about the neuroscience block here. We have big data research challenges, and some at the research level, some of the problems we're talking about is brain oscillations for cognition, high throughput to unravel regulation of neural circuits. I didn't touch upon these. There are very, very exciting and interesting problems which neuroscientists actually require they probably want to work with engineers because they cannot address these problems on their own. And with experts like Prasad, cyber infrastructure is absolutely critical to make this happen, because we'd like to use databases such as NeuronDB, ModelDB. I've given some examples of that. So that is the need, the users. And I'll let Prasad address, some of how we plan to do it. So Prasad, are you going to talk about these slides? Or, so maybe it's a good time to hand over to you. I do know this, but you know this much better than I do.
Yeah, and you can talk about the last.
Okay, so we will actually have Neuro Big Data Symposiums. We've had several on campus. So we started with one even prior to starting this grant, actually. We brought folks from different disciplines, including the medical discipline, and we talked about their needs. We had a Qualtrics survey to get all of their needs. We have assembled those, and we have students in our courses, which Prasad mentioned, trying to take some of those exemplars and try to get workflows developed from those. And just actually having these symposia has helped tremendously to bring faculty together. And one of the big things they know is all these tools are free. They are open source, thanks to the NSF grant. So I think they are very excited about using it. We, in fact, had to, stop because our room size was about 50. We couldn't accommodate graduate students because they were just faculty. So we'd like to open this up later on to graduate students also. So we've had quite a bit of success actually in exciting faculty because I believe they have a need. So our goal is to have this one-stop shop portal to speed up research by providing immediate, easy, and very good, very efficient access to all of these resources. So let me stop there. As Prasad said, we are happy to take questions anytime, including on neuroscience. Thank you.
So thank you, Satish. I'll switch back. So Eli, how much more time we have? Is there a time restriction here?
We've got about 20 minutes left, including the question window. This is nominally scheduled to go until noon Pacific, 3 Eastern. We can extend it a little bit, but I expect we'll lose some people at that point.
No, I think I can take another 5-10 minutes to wrap up, and we can take more questions if there are questions. So I'll again bring my slides back up. I'll mute myself. Okay, I'm back. So
it all looks good.
Yeah, all right, cool. So I'll talk a little bit about sort of the more hands-on activities we're doing in sort of taking baby steps towards the grand vision that Satish showed. I mean, it was awesome how he made a case that this is an important societal problem and how it's really interdisciplinary and has data problems and cyber infrastructure solutions that requires many different ways to bring people together to solve these problems. So I think, thank you, Satish, for bringing that story. And from a cyber infrastructure perspective, we are interested in trying to solve these use cases, essentially, like Satish said, of the scientists. And one of the ways, again, given the funding restriction, also sort of to get started at a baby steps is we brought those problems to a course. And we provided the students with access to resources, the Neuroscience Gateway Cybers and SciNeuro, and we had them present presentations. We had faculty present presentations. We had them do posters. We have some exam, and we've been doing some symposiums, like Satish said, to basically inspire others to join our efforts. And a little detail about how the course is being structured now is we've started looking at how there are basically tools that require, either memory intensive or compute intensive, or there are more image processing requirements to do the science, right? So we're sort of looking at maybe even they need desktops, what sort of data transfer needs are necessary to create these workflows and automate them. So trying to understand those sort of requirements and map them to cyber infrastructure, I guess, right? So capability. So that's been sort of a part of the course syllabus. And the use cases which really are more concrete that help us start looking at solving some of these problems of bringing the capabilities and the needs. And Satish again had a very nice way of explaining where the neural simulations are our starting point. We're getting into fMRI with the medical school in the future, and we're actually doing a zebrafish imaging use case in this semester. And all of these use cases are coming from a survey, and I think you can see the survey link down. It's going to be interesting for you to see how we're trying to poll people to give us information. And I realized, in the last year or so that the survey of domain scientists is a science in itself. And Eli knows this because he's done it for a long time very well. But it's in my own limited world, I realize this is a very difficult and more important problem actually than the technical problem is the right engagement of the domain scientists. So we have been successful in having the survey being taken by people. We had one-on-one meetings with them, and they span, as one would expect, issues from data formats to database issues to analysis requirements to automation needs and sort of knowledge sharing. This idea to take this phenomenon they see in their big data and scale it with more data, with more inputs from experts and other resources. So we did see that. And the summary of all of that survey, I think, is captured in this slide in some sense. So most of the domain scientists, at least in neuroscience that we polled in our campus, they want a reproducible environment, which is easy to learn. They want to be able to customize and have the ability to rerun their experiments and have the ability to do fast processing. They don't care if it is local resources or Amazon or Neuroscience Gateway. They want their work done as easily and fast. And they want the analysis, and most of the projects have very, very compelling visualization. So they have needs to integrate visualization tools as part of their workflows. And to do what they want to do, they need examples to start from. So tutorials and documentation was another common requirement. And so as in our cyber infrastructure community, we'd like to try to take a hammer to this problem is we build science gateways so people can maybe click and have one-stop shop, like Satish said, where they can go meet people, get their data to these infrastructures to be processed and shared across. So we started looking at a gateway, kind of a architecture for the neuroscience. And there are good examples already. The Neuroscience Gateway, which is built on Cypress at the SDSC, is an example. And obviously, we have many more gateways that exist on national resources. So we are now in the process of building a gateway here using Cypress, which is what drives NSG. And we want to be able to federate the gateways, as I said, with local and national resources seamlessly for users to scale their studies. And the students are essentially doing this. So they are in the class teaming up to look at how to create catalogs of templates for the various use cases and how to look at reuse and repurpose of those templates. Another interesting thing that's being developed in the gateways we're looking at are chatbots. So a lot of, like what Satish said, is the users have many parameters they want to specify. They don't necessarily have a good understanding of the scope of the capabilities of the cyber infrastructure. So we actually have a very interesting demo. We can even share a video with you where this chatbot sits in sync with the web portal. And as the navigation happens, it's contextual. So it actually prompts questions and guides the user through a set of workflow steps. Basically having the data being uploaded, the processing happening, monitoring for the results to be completed. And this is sort of version 1 of our exercise here. The students have kind of taken it ground up in specifying templates, starting to look at what services are necessary. And we had pieces of it already from SoyKB and other cyber sort of workflows. We are adapting them to the neuroscience workflows. And we are building these sort of what I call guided user interfaces as part of the course development, which like Satish says, we want to roll it out to other users as tutorials. And this is my last slide. We hope that our sort of collaboration at MU and the symposium at MU is a starting point, and that we can bring in others from other campuses with same or different needs and capabilities to share information. And we're lucky to have NSF even sponsor this workshop, so we could bring in 10, 15 participants every year. And we're planning one either late summer or sometime in fall. That will be our first workshop. We want to call it the annual Neuroscience Cyberinfrastructure Users and Contributors Workshop, but maybe there's a more fancy name to that. But that's kind of what we want to have organized pretty soon, and we have funding to do that for 3 years. And I hope many of you are attending this will consider participating and also spreading the word. So with that, I can maybe stop and see if there are any questions.
All right, thank you very much. That's great. There's a bunch of good stuff in both of those talks. Folks have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat window. While people are sort of ruminating on that, I have a couple of things that I've jotted down during the presentation. One is, so you mentioned the value of having sort of tutorials and a starting point so that the scientist doesn't have to sort of be the integrator and start from scratch, right? They've got something that they can start with and work from. I think that's a really good insight. I'm be very interested to see have you talk a little bit more about what some of those things look like and what you've found to sort of be important to scientists in that space.
That's a great point. Actually, that's been really the latest set of things we've been looking at. And one of the obvious answers we're hoping will be a right answer is use of Jupyter notebooks. So as you saw from the V1 demo, building these web interfaces and having users customize it, or having developers try to keep customizing it for different use cases, it kind of gets a little boring very quickly, or kind of cumbersome very quickly. One of the ways we are thinking this can scale is the user interface essentially could be something like a Jupyter notebook. And in fact, we have a class project in this semester where they're looking at setting up these Jupyter notebooks. Right now, they're setting it up on Genie, but they could be essentially hosted. And I think it's very close, and Tim's on the call also. His group is helping us set it up on our MU resources so that users can actually go through those lab exercises that Satish was talking about. And in the notebook itself, they can actually submit these, jobs to national resources, or in these notebooks, specify how the chain of automation needs to happen between the software and the hardware, and some of the visualization that they want. So that's one of the things we're looking at. And as Satish said, I mean, he is already scaling the need for these tutorials for tens of teachers and hundreds of students. So he has the population ready already, and it's just a matter of getting the content out to those programs that he was talking about. So that's a very high priority for us, and we're seeing that the Jupyter Notebook way is probably one way, and maybe there are other ways, but that's what we're thinking.
That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. So you touched on automation, and you brought it up again in the context of the Jupyter Notebook. That's something that we see a need for in a variety of environments. I'm interested in what are the sort of key technological pieces that you've seen in terms of getting that automation right? Are you just running everything on OAuth 2, or is that not really the space in which you're encountering issues that you need to solve?
Yeah. And so the automation problem that, at least again this semester, is this project I talked about, zebrafish image analysis automation. We have a biologist, Anand Chandrasekhar, who has terabytes of this image data sets that he has custom MATLAB scripts that another professor's team at in our department has developed, and they have been able to kind of, in the first year plus sort of collaboration in the last 2 years, I would say, gotten a kind of a process to work. So the students still go with a DVD or a thumb drive, get the files to their lab here, set up a MATLAB environment to analyze it, and they somehow have to go back. And these are even video files of these zebrafish jaw movements. And so the automation that at least we are looking is pretty basic, in the sense that there are these proven ways in which the scientist Anand and his team wants to look at these videos being captured in his lab, and this MATLAB scripts being run, and the scale of the data and the types of questions they would ask on the data is very high in variety, and also requires the ability to really automate effectively. And so one of the Jupyter notebooks and also one of the Portal V2 versions we are working on is how do we get MATLAB scripts that are developed by these students, how do we get the data that's at this lab that's created freshly every few days or weeks, and how do we get the management going, which is sort of not the traditional way we use our HPC system. So Tim again and his group are kind of understanding how they can set up their infrastructure as a sort of a web service for us to integrate with, and also have these sort of dedicated sandbox or experimental environments for Anand's use case, for example, right? So that's what we're dealing at this point. And again, it's limited by sort of the student time and student the grant budget and all those things. But the problem is there; it's very real. How fast we get to the solution is kind of hard. But our automation at this point is essentially been that is how do we get this. And some of these things can be automated to some extent already on the Neuroscience Gateway. They have, we know, an unlimited MATLAB license. So Amitav Majumdar, he was explaining that anybody in the country or the world with an NSG account can run all these MATLAB experiments or scripts or automation on their infrastructure. And they already have a set of web services that's based on Cypress. So part of our automation is essentially trying to create that sort of a service-oriented, infrastructure on the Cyberinfrastructure resource side, and also start having the students understand and appreciate all of that goes into the automation of the data part, and the integrating the tools with the data, and sort of looking at this high scale problem. And obviously, as again, Eli, you're saying the value of how to not make this daunting for the user, but make it easy and reproducible for other experiments. So we are starting on that journey in that sense, and we are not yet into the point of logging who's accessing these resources and what permissions they have. We have not gotten to that yet. But one of the basic things, at least in the Jupyter notebooks, we are trying to do is we want to track how many people use it, and who are the people who are using it, at least so that we know what's the uptake on these as we distribute them.
Excellent. Okay, we're up against the end here. Does anyone, are there any other questions before we close? Okay. Well, thank you very much, Prasad. And just to let folks know, I think there's no brown bag next week. And we'll hear from Jason on what's coming in the weeks to come. So thank you all very much for attending, and thank you, Prasad, for speaking. And have a great day, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, Eli, very much. I appreciate your help. Thank you.
Thanks all.
Bye.